Adeline Marsh pressed her father's mortgage papers flat on the kitchen table and counted the days until Michaelmas. 40, she counted them the way she had once counted stars with a boy who swore he would come back. She did not weep. Weeping was for women with time to spare. Instead, her fingers found a dry cornstalk on the sill, and out of an old habit, her hands began to plait it. Over, under, and around. The same knot every harvest. The candle stub guttered. The sums did not change no matter how many times she added them. Then the boards of the porch creaked under a stranger's weight. Silas Crane stood in her doorway with his hat in his hands, and his smile already arranged. Behind him, out at the gate, 2 hired men leaned on the fence and listened. "A widow with a mortgaged farm cannot afford pride, Mrs. Marsh," he said. "Marry me, or the parish reads your father's name on the auction board by harvest." She said nothing. She only set the little corn dolly down beside the papers, so her hands would have something honest to rest against. And that was the moment the black-lacquered carriage crested the lane. It came slow along the rutted track, 4 dark horses, a coat of arms on the door that no one in the vale had ever been near enough to read. The new Duke of Ashmere had bought every failing note in the valley, they said. Now his footman stepped down into the mud in white gloves and held out a card toward her. Adeline reached for it, and her own hand trembled so badly she could not read the name upon it. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before we go on, if a story about a love that waited longer than it had any right to means something to you, subscribe and comment the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far Adeline's story travels. Somewhere out there is a village not so different from Larkmore. Tell me its name. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense until you know the girl she was before she was a widow. Larkmore Farm sat low in the vale of Wexbridge, in the green heart of Somerset, in the autumn of the year 1871. It was not a grand place. It had never been grand, but it was clean, and it was hers, or rather her father's, and for 4 generations of Hartwells it had been enough. The land ran down from the lane in a slow green fall toward the river. There was a water meadow at the bottom that flooded silver every spring and gave the sweetest grass in the parish. There was an orchard gone half to moss. There was a barn with a sag in its ridge and a farmhouse of grey lyre stone with a slate roof and small deep windows that held the cold. In the yard a well. By the door a bench-worn pail where 3 generations of tired men had sat down at the end of the day. Adeline had been born in the upstairs room. She was 34 years old now and 2 years a widow, and she had come back under her father's roof the way water comes back to the low ground, because there was nowhere else for it to go. She ran the harvest with 2 old men, old Ned, who had worked the farm since before she was christened, and his brother Samuel, who was slower still. Between the 3 of them and her father's failing hands, they had got the wheat in. Just the stacks stood in the rickyard now, thatched against the weather, and they were smaller than last year, and last year had been smaller than the year before that. Her father Elias was 63 and looked older. His heart was going. The doctor from Wexbridge had a long word for it and a short prognosis, and both amounted to the same thing. He was not to lift. He was not to strain. He was not to let himself be vexed. And every one of those instructions he broke a dozen times a day, because a man who has worked land for 50 years does not know how to sit in a chair and watch it slip away from him. But you have to understand the girl before you can grieve the woman. So let me tell you about Adeline at 19. At 19 she was the prettiest thing in the vale, and she did not know it, which made it worse. She had dark hair she wore in a plait down her back, and eyes the colour of the river in shadow, and a way of laughing that started before the joke was finished. Half the young men of the parish would have walked to Bath and back for one dance with her. She loved the blacksmith's son. His name was Tom Rourke. He worked his father's forge at the crossroads below the church, and he was tall and quiet, and his hands were scarred from the hot iron, and he had a way of looking at a broken thing until he understood it. He mended the church gate for nothing. He shod the vicar's mare and would not take the coin. And when Adeline Hartwell brought him her father's ploughshare to be beaten straight, he took twice as long over it as he needed, and neither of them minded. They courted the whole of one summer. It was a secret, and it was the worst kept secret in the county. They met at the stile in the water meadow. He taught her to plait a corn dolly the old harvest way, over and under and around, the knot his grandmother had taught him. He said a girl who could make one could keep a house. She kept the little dolly on her windowsill all that winter, and when it dried and crumbled she made another, and the making of it was really the keeping of him. Then her father found out. Elias Hartwell was not a cruel man. But he was a proud one, and pride in a poor man is a strange and dangerous thing. He looked at his only daughter, and he looked at the smith's son, with the burns on his arms and the mud on his boots, and he saw not a good man, but a small one, a crossroads and an anvil, a life no bigger than the one Elias himself had scraped out. He did not forbid it in anger. That was the awful part. He sat Tom down at that same kitchen table, and he said, kindly, that Adeline was worth more than a forge, and that if Tom loved her, he would go away and make himself into a man worth a Hartwell's daughter, and come back when he had. And a boy of 20, with his heart full and his pockets empty, believed him. Tom went. He shipped out to make his fortune, in the north, in the yards, wherever a strong pair of hands could be sold dear, and he swore to her at the stile, in the last of the light, that he would write, and that he would come back, and that no amount of years would change it. He wrote. One letter. She never saw it. She did not know that then. She only knew that the weeks went to months, and the months to a year, and no word came, and the corn dolly on her sill dried and was not remade, and a girl can only stand so long at a window before she stops looking out of it. So when steady Jonah Marsh came asking, Jonah with his 40 good acres over the ridge, Jonah who could clear the interest on Larkmoor with a season's yield, Jonah who was kind and dull and safe, Elias was glad, and Adeline was tired. And the farm needed saving. She married him. She stood in the church she had planned to be married in, and she said the words to the wrong man, and she meant them because she was the kind of woman who would make herself mean them. It was not a bad marriage. That is the sorrow of it. Jonah was good to her. He never raised his hand or his voice. He worked hard, and he loved her plainly, and he asked for nothing she could not give. And she gave him respect and care, and a warm house, and everything but the one thing she had left in a corn dolly at a stile 11 years before. He caught the lung fever in the wet spring 2 years back. It went to his chest, and stayed there, and drowned him slow over a winter, and he died owing the county bank more than his 40 acres could cover, because he had borrowed against them to keep both farms afloat in a run of bad harvests. The bank took marsh land. Adeline came home to Larkmoor with a black dress and a widow's name and nothing else, and she took up the running of her father's farm because her father's hands had begun to shake. And still, this is the thing you must hold on to, still, at each harvest, when the last of the wheat was in, Adeline Marsh sat down at the kitchen table with a dry stalk in her hands and plaited a corn dolly. Over and under and around. The knot a boy had taught her by the river when the world was still open. She could not have told you why she did it. She would have said it was habit, but she set it on the windowsill every autumn just the same, and every autumn it was the closest thing to a prayer she allowed herself. That is the woman. Now you know why what comes next costs so much. It was an evening in the 3rd week of September when the trouble put on a name. Adeline and her father sat at the table with the account book open between them and the good lamp lit, which they only lit for figures, because the figures were the one thing worth the oil. Elias ran his thumb down the column. His thumb was yellow at the nail, and it shook. £1,850, he said. Due at Michaelmas quarter day. I know it, father, 40 days. I know that too. He was quiet a while. Outside a dog barked once and gave it up. The lamp hissed. The bank has sold it on, he said at last, as though it were the least of the news and not the whole of it. All the bad paper in the Vale. They've sold the lot to the new man up at Ashmere, the Duke. He said the word the way a farmer says the word frost. So it's him we owe now, not the bank. Not that it makes a ha'porth of difference to us. We've never met the man, and never shall. He's only paper to us. Only paper to us. She would remember that later, the way you remember a thing you laughed at just before the roof came down. "What's he like, this Duke?" she asked, mostly to give her father something to say that was not a number. Elias shrugged, knew come to it. The old Duke and his sons all dead inside 5 years. The fever, then the hunting, then the sea took the last. Title went hunting down the line for a body to land on, and it landed on some far cousin nobody ever heard of. Come up from nothing, they say. Been abroad. Made money in the yards before the coronet found him. He closed the book. Rich men buying up poor men's debts. There's your gentry for you. He'll sit in his great house and count what we owe him and never once put a face to it. And thank God for that girl, the last thing a proud house wants is the Duke of Ashmere taking an interest in it. She banked the fire and blew out the good lamp and went up to bed, and she did not sleep, and she did not know that 15 miles off in a house with 200 rooms a man was sitting up over the same account book, or one just like it, with a candle burned to nothing and a small brown thing on the desk in front of him that a housemaid had found in the pocket of a coat he'd worn to view his new lands, and had almost thrown away, and had not. Silas Crane came 3 mornings later. He came the way he always came, without being asked, and just at the moment you had least strength to refuse him. Crane was a mill and land man out of Wexbridge, 48, soft in the middle, and hard everywhere it counted. He wore good broadcloth and a watch chain, and a smile he had bought along with everything else he owned. He had spent 20 years buying failing farms at auction for a song and selling the water rights on for a symphony, and he was always courteous, and that was the frightening thing about him. He never raised his voice because he never had to. The law did his shouting. He wanted the Larkmoor water meadow. He had wanted it for years. The sweetest grass in the parish, the silver flood every spring, the river frontage that could turn a mill wheel or drown a rival's fields at a whim, and lately he had come to want something more, which was Adeline herself, because a man like Crane collects standing the way he collects deeds, and a Hartwell wife would have made a gentleman of him in a way no amount of money quite had. He found her in the yard with her sleeves rolled, salting the last of the pig. He waited, hat in hand, until she had to look at him. "Mrs. Marsh, a little beau. You look tired. It grieves me to see you so worked." "There's work to do, Mr. Crane. There need not be." He turned his hat slowly in his hands. "I'll speak plain, since we're neither of us young. Your father's note falls due in a month and you cannot meet it. You know it. I know it. Half the parish knows it. God forgive their tongues." He smiled. "I am a wealthy man with no wife and a foolish fondness for you that I have never troubled to hide. Marry me. I'll clear the note the same afternoon. Your father dies in his own bed, with the deeds clean. You never do a hard day's labour again." He let it sit. Then, gently, or the note falls due, and I am first in line at the auction. And I promise you I shall not be sentimental about the price. The parish reads your father's name on the board by harvest. The choice is entirely yours. I only ask you make it before the choosing is taken out of your hands." She looked at him a long moment. Down at the gate his 2 hired men had stopped their work to listen, and were not ashamed to be seen doing it. "I thank you for your offer," Adeline said, and her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that later. "I'll not marry to save the land. I've done that once already, Mr. Crane, and it cost a good man his peace and me mine. I'll not do it twice. Good morning." She went back to salting the pig. Her hands were perfectly steady. She did not let them be anything else until she heard his trap go rattling off up the lane, and then she gripped the edge of the salting trough and stood a while with her head down, and no one saw. Which was how she liked her weakness. That was the morning the world tilted. Because that same afternoon she walked up to Ashmere to beg. Not to beg outright. She would not have called it that. She dressed in her good grey, and she walked the 4 miles by the field paths, and she told herself she was going to speak to the Duke's steward about terms. About time. 40 days was cruel, but a rich man loses nothing by being kind, and perhaps if she stood before someone and put a human face to the paper, this new lord would grant her father till after harvest, or take a smaller sum down and the rest by the year. It was reasonable. It was the sort of thing a Christian gentleman might do. She rehearsed it the whole 4 miles. Ashmere sat on its hill behind a mile of park wall. She had never been so close to it. The gates were iron and gold and taller than the church, and there was a lodge, and a man at the lodge in a coat finer than anything her father had worn to his own wedding. She gave her name. She said her business, humbly, and she watched the man's face change as he understood what she was, not a lady come to call, but a debtor come to plead. "His Grace does not see tenants at the house," the man said, not unkindly. That was almost worse. "You'll write to the estate office at Wexbridge like the rest. There's a form." And he looked past her already, to the road, to whatever was worth his looking at, and she was already gone from his eyes, though she still stood there in her good grey, with the dust of 4 miles on her hem. Only a tenant's widow. Turned from the gate. She would carry that image the rest of her life. The gold gate, the wall going on forever. Herself on the wrong side of it, made small, made nothing, by a house she owed money to and would never be let into. And then, as she turned to go, the carriages came. A little procession of them, coming up the drive from within. The Duke was going out to view more of his new country, they said afterward, riding his acres like a man learning the shape of a stranger's face. Adeline stepped back off the gravel to let them pass, as a tenant's widow must. And in the second carriage, at the window, she saw the back of a man's head and one shoulder as he leaned to say something to the fellow across from him. She could not have told you his face. She never saw his face, but something in the set of that shoulder, the particular way he braced his arm against the door as the wheel dropped into a rut, something in it went through her like cold water. It was the way a man holds himself when he has spent years bracing against the swing of a hammer. It was a working man's shoulder in a duke's coat. She stood in the road until the dust settled. Then she told herself she was a fool who had walked 4 miles and eaten nothing, and she went home. But she did not sleep that night either, and the thing she was chasing round and round the dark was not the debt. It was a shoulder, and a summer 11 years buried. Now here is what Adeline did not know, and what I will tell you, because you have earned it, and she had not. The card the footman would later hand her at her own gate, you have already seen that moment, at the start, out of its order, because I wanted you to feel it before you understood it. That card read a name. And the name upon it was Theodore Rourke. Theodore, Tom, the smith's son. The boy sent away at 20 to make himself worth a Hartwell's daughter. He had made himself worth a great deal more than that. He had gone north and worked iron, and then bought iron, and then owned the men who worked it, and he had been on the far side of the world buying the rails a country runs on, when a lawyer's letter chased him across an ocean to tell him that 4 men he had never met had died, one after another, and that the coronet of Ashmere had come down the family line like a stone down a well and stopped against all sense on him. The far cousin nobody ever heard of. Come up from nothing. He had not wanted it. He had wanted, once, only one thing, and he had gone away to earn it, and he had written her a letter the first month he was gone. One letter, the truest thing he ever set his hand to, and he had waited for an answer that never came. And when word reached him a year on that Adeline Hartwell had married Jonah Marsh, something in Tom Rourke had closed like a forged door on a cold anvil, and he had poured the rest of himself into iron, because iron at least did what you shaped it to. He did not know about the letter. He thought she had read it and chosen against him. He thought she had taken the safe man and the 40 acres and forgotten the boy at the stile. That was the wound he carried, and it had made him rich and hard and lonely in equal measure. And then the title fell on him, and with it Ashmere, and with Ashmere the whole vale of Wexbridge, and one grey morning his new steward laid before him a list of the bad debts of the district that the county bank was glad to sell cheap, and among them, in a clerk's small hand, he read, Hartwell, E., Larkmoor Farm, 1,850. He had bought the lot inside the hour. Every failing note in the vale. He had bought them, if he was honest with himself, to get his hands on that single one, and he had told himself it was so he would have her father where he wanted him at last, the proud man who had sent him off like a beggar. But that was not the truth, and he half knew it even then. The truth was small and brown, and lived in his coat pocket. Because when he had gone to view his lands he had walked, alone at dusk, down to a certain stile in a certain water meadow, and he had found the old harvest knot dried and pinned to the rail where some hand had left it that very autumn. And he had known then that whatever the years had made of Adeline Hartwell, she had not forgotten the way to plait a corn dolly, and he had put it in his pocket, and he had not been able to breathe quite right since. So, now you know what she doesn't. Hold it. It is going to hurt, watching her not know it. That is rather the point. The letters went out a week later, stiff cards with the Ashmere arms in black. Every tenant and freeholder in the vale was bidden to the harvest ball at the great house, an old custom. The steward said that the new Duke wished to revive his way of meeting his country. There would be dancing in the long gallery and a supper laid, and the small folk in the servants' hall and the better sort above, all under one roof for one night, as the harvest custom had it 100 years back. Adeline did not want to go. She said as much plainly to the card. But her father wanted her to. Elias, who could barely climb the stairs now, took the invitation in his shaking hands and looked at it a long time. A Hartwell was asked to Ashmere, he said, and there was something in his voice she had not heard in years. Not greed, something older and sadder. My grandmother danced there. Did I ever tell you? Before the land went thin. He set the card on the mantel, like a relic. Go, girl, wear your mother's pearls. Let them see a Hartwell can still walk into a great house with her chin up, whatever we owe. Let me have that much. So she went, for him. She took her one good gown, the grey silk she had married Jonah in, and she sat up 3 nights, making it over by candlelight, new sleeves, a bit of lace off her mother's Sunday collar, the pearls. When she was done it was 10 years out of the fashion, and she knew it, and she put her chin up anyway, because her father had asked for exactly that. The long gallery at Ashmere was 100 feet of candlelight. She had never seen so many candles in one room in her life. The chandeliers hung like frozen fire, and the floor was waxed to a river, and the county's daughters moved across it in silks, the colours of sweets in a shop window, rose and citron, and river blue, and Adeline in her made-over grey stood among them like a wren among finches, and felt every year of her age and every pound of her debt. There was a receiving line. Of course there was. The whole company filed past the new Duke to make their bow, and Adeline stood in it, with her gloved hands folded and her heart going like a hammer, and told herself it was only a rich stranger, only paper made flesh, only the man who held her father's ruin, and she would make her curtsy and get it done, and stand in a corner till it was decent to go home. The line moved. She kept her eyes down, as a tenant's widow should. She saw boots. She saw a black coat. She saw a gloved hand held out to take hers in the ritual of it, the briefest touch, glove to glove, meaning nothing. His hand closed on hers, and it did not let go on the beat it was meant to. She looked up. She had rehearsed, on the 4 miles home from the gate that first day. Every possible face this Duke might have, so as never to be caught out again. She had not rehearsed this one. Because this one she had known since she was 19. Older now, harder at the jaw, grey coming at the temple, the fine coat and the fine linen and the whole weight of a house she couldn't be let into standing behind him. But the eyes were the eyes that had watched a ploughshare until they understood it, and the hand around hers was scarred under the glove. She could feel it, the old burns, the iron. Tom, neither of them said it. That is the thing you must see. The whole gallery blazed around them, and the line waited behind her, and somewhere a fiddle tuned, and the two of them stood joined at the hand, in a silence that had 11 years, and 1 summer, and a style in it, and not one word was said. His mouth opened. Nothing came. Her breath had stopped somewhere below her ribs, and would not come up. The recognition went through them both like the toll of a bell you feel in the floor, and no one in that 100 feet of candlelight heard a thing, because the loudest moment of both their lives made no sound at all. And then Silas Crane's voice cut across the gallery like a saw through green wood. "Your Grace." He came bustling up in his good broadcloth, delighted. Delighted. A man who has found exactly the trouble he was hunting. "You'll allow me. I believe you hold this good lady's paper, and it's only right you should know your own tenants. May I present the widow Marsh?" A little pause, waited, pitched for the 20 people nearest to hear, "whose farm your Grace now holds. Larkmoor, a sweet little property, when it's paid for." And he smiled, first at the Duke, then at Adeline, and the smile said, "I have shown the whole county what you are, in front of the man you owe. Curtsy to him. Debtor. Let them watch you do it." The blood went out of Adeline's face, and then came back into it, burning. She felt every eye near her turn. She felt the word, widow, farm, holds, go rippling out into the candlelight, the way a stone's fall goes rippling out across the silver flood. Tom let go of her hand. For one moment she thought he would do it, say some cool, lordly thing, claim his ownership of her ruin before the county, be the Duke, and let her be the debtor, because 11 years is a long time, and men grow into their coats. She braced for it the way she had learnt to brace for everything. Instead, he turned on Crane a look she remembered. It was the look he had turned, once, on a man who kicked a lamed horse outside the forge. "Quiet, level, absolute, Mr. Crane," he said. "I know my tenants better than you suppose, and I did not open my house at harvest to hear a lady's misfortune announced across it like a bill of sale." The gallery went very still. "You will oblige me by remembering whose roof you stand under." It was not loud. It did not need to be. Crane's smile stayed exactly where it was and died behind it, and he made a bow and a murmur and stepped back, and the 20 people who had turned to watch a widow shamed found they had instead watched a speculator put in his place by a duke, and turned away again, disappointed and buzzing. But the damage of it, the real damage, was already done, and it was done inside Adeline, not out. Because she had heard, under the Duke's kindness, the thing she was too proud to bear. Pity. She thought it was pity. She stood in her maid over grey among the silks, publicly named as the woman whose farm this man could take with a word, publicly rescued by that same man in front of the whole vale. And every ounce of Hartwell in her rose up against it like a horse against a whip. The fiddles struck up, couples were forming for the first reel. Tom Rourke, Duke of Ashmere, held out his hand to her a second time, not the glove touch of the line now, but the open palm of a man asking a woman to dance in front of 100 witnesses. And there was everything in his face, 11 years of it. The style, the letter, the ocean, the 4 dead men and the coronet he never wanted, and under all of it the boy who had said no amount of years would change it. "Adeline," he said, "just the once. Lo, so only she could have it. Dance with me." And she looked at the open hand, the scarred hand under the fine glove, and she looked at the county watching, and she thought, "He has my father's note in his desk, and he has just shown the whole vale he can be kind to me, as a lord is kind to a beggar. And if I put my hand in his now, I am the debtor Crane named me, dancing for the mercy of the man who holds my ruin." She thought, "I married once to save this farm, and I will not spend my dignity to save it a second time." She thought all of it in the space of a breath, and none of it was the truth, and every bit of it felt like the truth, which is how a proud heart lies to itself. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, loud enough, clear enough, her chin up, exactly as her father had asked. "But I don't dance." And she curtsied to him, a perfect curtsy. A debtor's curtsy, the very thing Crane had wanted, and the very thing that would wound Tom worst, and she turned and walked the length of that blazing gallery, with her back straight and her eyes dry, and 100 people parting to let her pass. She did not run. She would not give them that. She walked out under the frozen fire of the chandeliers and down the great stair and out into the dark of the park, and only when the music was a thin thing behind her and the night was cool on her burning face did she let herself lean against the cold gold of the gate and shake. And she did not feel it fall. In the rush of leaving, in the trembling of her own hands, the little corn dolly she had tucked into her reticule that morning, without knowing why, the harvest knot, the boy's knot, over and under and around, worked loose of the drawstring and dropped soundless onto the waxed floor of the gallery, behind her, where she would never think to look for it. She walked the 4 miles home in her married silk and her mother's pearls, and she never knew she had lost it. But Tom Rourke saw it fall. He stood where she had left him, with his hand still half out, and the reel starting up without them, and he watched her go the length of his own house and out of it, and then he looked down, and there on the river of the waxed floor lay a small brown thing that had no business in a duke's gallery. He crossed to it before a servant could. He bent, the Duke of Ashmere, in front of the county, bent to the floor like a working man, and he picked it up, and he closed it in his scarred hand, and he stood a moment with his fist against his chest, as though something in there had cracked. He put it in his pocket. Next to the other one, the one from the stile. 2 harvest knots now, both hers, and not one word said between them in 11 years but her name, and his, and "Thank you, Your Grace, I don't dance." He turned back to his blazing gallery and his 100 guests, and the daughters of the county in their sweet shop silks, and he smiled the smile a duke is supposed to smile, and he did not dance that night either. And nobody, watching the richest man in the vale move so easy and so cold among them, would ever have guessed that he had gone away at 20 for one girl, and come back at 37 a duke for her, and just been turned from her a second time, not from a gate now, but from the whole of a life, with a curtsy and 4 small words. 40 days to Michaelmas, the note in his desk, the dolly in his pocket, and downstairs already Silas Crane pouring himself a glass of the Duke's wine and beginning, quietly, courteously, to think of a way to buy that note off the great fool who wouldn't use it, and foreclose on the widow himself. She thought the man who held her ruin had only pitied her. She had no idea he had loved her the whole way home. The frost came early that year. It silvered the fields at Larkmoor, and it did not lift till noon, and Adeline rose in the dark to break the ice on the trough with the heel of her boot, the way her father had done for 50 years before his heart went weak on him. She did not think about the ball. She told herself she did not think about the ball. And every time the black carriage came up the lane on some errand of the estate, she found she had stopped whatever her hands were doing, and she made them start again. He came himself. That was the trouble. Not a steward. Not a clerk. The Duke of Ashmere came down the muddy lane in his own boots, and he found the broken fence rail on the far side of the water meadow, and one morning it was mended. Nobody asked him to mend it. Nobody saw him do it. But the split oak was gone, and a new rail sat clean in the socket, and old Ned scratched his head over it and said it must have been Samuel, and Samuel said it must have been Ned, and Adeline stood at the gap and knew it was neither. Then the wheelwright came, paid for, to set the cart to rights. Then the lower field, that had lain flooded and sour 2 winters running, was drained in a week by men she had not hired, and the water ran off it into the ditch he had cut, and the ground came up black and good. She met him at the field edge with her chin high and her heart going like a hammer, and she said, "I cannot pay for this, your grace." "There's nothing to pay," he said. "It's my land the water was spoiling. It is my father's land. For now," he said, and then he saw her face, and he was sorry the moment it was out of him. But she had already turned it into a wound and carried it home. They bent over the account book together one wet afternoon, the two of them at the kitchen table where the candle stub still sat in its own grease on the sill, and she showed him the figures because he asked, and because a duke who holds your note may ask what he likes. And somewhere in the middle of it, over a line where Jonah had written down the price of a cow in his careful crooked hand, she said a thing dry and true about the cow, and how it had never given a fair pail in its life, and had kicked old Ned into the midden the day it came, and Tom laughed. He laughed, and she laughed, and for the length of that laugh they were 19 and 20 again at the stile in the water meadow, and she called him Tom. She heard it leave her own mouth. Tom, just the one word, plain as bread. And she stopped as if she had dropped something that would break, and she looked down at the book, and neither of them said anything at all. Outside the rain came harder on the glass. He closed his scarred hand slow on the table, and he did not reach across it, though she saw that he wanted to, and she was glad and sorry both that he did not. "I'll not keep you from the estate," she said, standing, gathering the cups that did not need gathering. "Adeline, it's Mrs. Marsh," she said. Quiet, not cruel, only certain. And he took his hat and went out into the rain, and she watched the carriage lamps swing away up the lane, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth till the wanting passed. She did not know about the note. That was the whole of it. She thought the note in his desk was a knife he was choosing when to use. She thought every kindness was a man measuring a farm for the taking, and being gentle about it because he had been a poor boy once and knew how to be gentle with poor people. She did not know he had bought every bad debt in the Vale for one reason only. She did not know her father's name was the only name he had ever wanted on a paper, and because she did not know, she did the bravest thing she had done since Jonah died. She saddled the old cob, and she rode the 15 miles to Ashmere. 200 rooms and a mile of park wall, and she went up the great drive on a farm horse with mud to its hocks, and she would not let the footman take her anywhere but to him. She stood in a room the size of the whole of Larkmoor, with a fire she could have roasted an ox at, and she kept her back straight, and when he came in, she did not curtsy. "I've come to make you an offer, your grace." He stopped. "Have you? I'll not be given the farm, I'll not be pitied off my debt, and I'll not be bought, and I'll thank you to understand that once and for all." Her voice shook once, and she mastered it. "But I owe you £1,850, and there's 40 good acres of interest in me if you'll take it. I keep the best dairy in the Vale, ask anyone but Silas Crane. I keep an honest book. I'll do your accounts, I'll run your home farm butter, I'll work off what I owe with my 2 hands like an honest woman, and when it's paid, and I'll owe you nothing. Not thanks. Not my hand." "Nothing," the fire snapped. He looked at her a long moment, this woman in a made-over habit with the mud of his own drive on her, offering to scrub 12 years off a debt sooner than take a shilling she hadn't earned. And something moved in his face that she had not seen since they were young, and his hand went halfway to his breast pocket, where a folded thing lived, and he opened his mouth, and she truly saw that he was about to tell her something that would turn the world over. "Adeline, there's a thing you don't know. 11 years ago the door opened. Your Grace, Mr. Crane, is below and will not be put off." The moment closed like a fist. Tom's hand came down from his breast. "Tell Mr. Crane I am engaged." But it was gone, whatever it had been, and she took her chance and her dignity and rode home through the dusk without an answer, and lay awake till the cocks crew, wondering what an Iron Duke could possibly not know how to say to a farmer's widow. What Crane wanted below was simple. He had smelled the tide turning, the way his sort always does. He came into the great study with his hat in his 2 hands and his courtesy on like a good coat, and he laid a paper on the Duke's desk, and it was a bank draft. £2,200, Your Grace, for the Marsh note. Cash on the nail, Michaelmas or before. He smiled his lawyer's smile. "Your Grace has no use for a widow's mortgage. It's a nuisance to a great estate, small and sentimental, and troublesome. I'll take it off your hands at a clear profit. You lose nothing. You gain £350 and a tidy book." Tom looked at the draft. He looked at Crane. "No? No? The note is not for sale." Crane's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "May I ask why, Your Grace?" "A man of business, you may not," said Tom. "Good day." And Crane went out into the cold with his draft in his pocket and murder in his heart, and by the Sunday it was all over the Vale that the new Duke of Ashmere would not sell the widow Marsh's note for love nor money. And everyone in the county knew what that meant, or thought they did. They meant it the ugly way. A duke does not keep a poor woman's debt in his own hand for kindness. He keeps it because he means to keep her. And Adeline, going into church on her father's arm with her head up, heard the whispering stop when she came near and start again when she passed, and she felt her name blacken like a rick left out in the rain. Prudence Vane was in the Ashmere pew that Sunday, the Earl's daughter, fair and cool and correct, whom the whole county had married to the Duke 100 times over the teacups. She looked at Adeline once, and Adeline looked back, and each of them read the other, and neither said a word. There was nothing to say. One of them was a rule, and one of them was a farmer's widow with mud on her hem, and everyone in that church knew which the world would choose. Adeline chose the churchyard. She waited till the last of them had gone off to their dinners, and she walked round the back to the low green corner where Jonah lay under his plain stone, Jonah Marsh and the 2 dates. And nothing else, because he had been a man of few words living, and she would not lie about him dead. She had never talked to him there. 2 years, and she had tended the grass and pulled the weeds, and never once talked to him. She knelt now in the cold, and she took from her pocket a corn dolly, new plaited, the harvest knot Tom had taught her at 19, and she held it in her lap. "Jonah," she said, "I have to tell you a thing, and you'll not like it. The wind moved in the yew. You were good to me. You never raised your voice nor your hand, and you took the farm on when my father couldn't, and you married a girl who'd given her heart away already, and you never once threw it in my face. Not once. I know I was a cold wife to you some nights, Jonah, and you knew why, and you never asked. You were a better man than I was a wife." Her voice broke, and she let it. "But I never loved you the way a woman ought to love the man she lies down beside. I loved you like a good roof loves a house. And you deserved better, and it's too late to give it you, and I'm sorry." She set the corn dolly on the top of the stone. "He's come back," she said. "You never met him. He's a duke now, if you can credit it, that ragged Smith's boy, and he holds our note, and half the county says I'm his kept woman for it, and I don't know his heart, and I daren't ask. But I know mine, Jonah, and it's been dead 2 years, and it's stirring, and I can't stop it, and I came to ask if you'd give me your leave to stop being a widow inside, to let you go, not the farm, not the ring, just the black in me. Will you let me?" The stone said nothing, the way stones do. But the wind dropped, and the cold eased a half a degree the way it does at the turn of an afternoon, and she took it for an answer, because she needed one. She reached for the corn dolly to leave it there for him, a widow's last harvest gift to a good dead man. And then she stopped. Her hand closed round it instead, because it was not Jonah's. That not. It had never been Jonah's. It was Tom's, and it always had been, and leaving it on another man's grave was one lie too many for a woman done with lying. She took it back. She pressed it warm into her palm, and she stood. "Goodbye, Jonah," she said. "God keep you. I'll tend the grass." She did not know Tom was at the churchyard wall. He had come to find her, having heard where she'd gone, meaning God knows what, to speak at last perhaps, to say the thing the butler had cut in half. And he had come round the yew in time to hear a woman on her knees give an honest account of a marriage to a dead man, and ask that dead man's leave to live, and he had stood dead still with his hat in his hand, and not breathed for fear of stopping her. He heard it all. He heard her say she'd loved a smith's boy, and given her heart away at 19, and never got it back. He heard 11 years of his own silence answered from the wrong side, by a woman who thought he had simply never written. And the truth he had carried like a stone came up in him then, and near choked him. Because she thought he'd forgotten her. She thought he'd gone off to make his fortune and left her to her fate. She did not know about the letter. She did not know he'd written, once, the week he landed the first iron contract, a letter that said, "Wait for me, I'm nearly worth your father's word," and that the letter had gone to Larkmore and never reached her hand. He knew now, standing at the wall, watching her walk away with the corn dolly warm in her fist, that somebody had taken that letter out of the road between them, and he could guess who. And his jaw set like a casting. He said nothing. It was not the place. You do not court a woman across her husband's grave. He let her go, and he went home to Ashmere, and he took out of his desk the note for £1,850, and he sat with it a long time by the fire and did not burn it, because burning it in private would only be another secret. And he was done with secrets. He would do it where the wound had been made. He would do it before the county that had watched her turned away. He had 40 days. And then he had 30. And then the Vale's luck, which had been bad for 2 years, turned to the worst it had. Elias Hartwell went out to the top field on a bright cold morning to see the last of the wheat carried, because a man who has worked land 63 years cannot sit by the fire while his last harvest goes to the barn without him. He lifted one sheaf, only one, and he put his hand to his chest and sat down slow in the stubble as if he'd only meant to rest, and old Ned came running. And by the time they got him to the house his lips were grey, and his breath came in little tearing sips, and the doctor rode out from Wexbridge and shut the bedroom door. He lived. But it cost. It cost a guinea for the doctor, and it cost the last of the harvest money for the physic, and it cost Elias the last of his strength, and he lay in the box bed by the kitchen fire and could not rise, and Adeline nursed him and ran the farm and kept the book, and the days ran down toward Michaelmas like water down a drain. And Silas Crane, who had watched and waited and smelled blood, went to the parish board on market day and pinned up a notice with his own hands where the whole vale could read it going in and out among the stalls. Larkmore Farm. To be sold by auction. Michaelmas Day on the village green. By order of the mortgage held. He did not have to hold the note to post it. He posted it as a man posts a threat. And he was standing by it, courteous, hat in hand, when Adeline came through the market with her basket, and he made sure the crowd was thick before he spoke. "A hard thing, Mrs. Marsh," he said, loud enough. "A hard thing to see a family's name on the board. I did try to spare you it. I offered you my hand and my roof, and you called it pride to refuse me." He shook his head, sorrowful as an undertaker. "You've pinned your hopes on his grace, I know. Half the Vale thinks you have. But I'll tell you what a friend tells you, Mrs., Marsh, for your own good, before all these good people, the Duke of Ashmere will never be seen saving a farmer's widow. He is to marry the Earl of Vane's daughter by spring. It's as good as cried in church. A great man may amuse himself with a pretty tenant through a wet autumn. He does not wed her, and he does not save her farm, and he does not stand up before his own kind and say so. He put his hat on. There's still my offer. It closes Michaelmas morning, same as the auction. A widow with a sick father cannot afford pride. Think on it. And the terrible thing, the thing that near broke her, was that it was sensible. It was all sensible. It was the sensible truth she had told herself 100 times in the dark. Tom had not spoken. Tom had not come. Tom had sent no word since the churchyard, and how should she know he had heard her there? How should she know anything but silence, the same silence she'd had from him 11 years before? A card had come from Ashmere, an invitation, stiff with the Ashmere arms, to what she did not know, for she had not opened it. It sat on the mantel, unopened beside the one her father had set there weeks ago. She would not open it. She would not be a fool twice for the same boy. So Adeline Hartwell did the thing that duty demanded, with her back straight and her eyes dry. She sat by her father's bed on the eve of Michaelmas, and she took his thin hand, and she told him she would accept Silas Crane in the morning, and the farm would be safe, and he need never see his name read off an auction board. And her father, who had not spoken above a whisper in a fortnight, gripped her hand with a strength that frightened her and said, "No, father, I sent one good man off this land with my pride," Elias said, and the tears ran into the white stubble of his cheeks. "I'll not watch you sell yourself to a bad one to mend it. I did you a wrong, girl, years back, a wrong I've carried. If I live to Michaelmas, I'll tell it. Don't you say yes to Crane. Promise me. Don't you dare say yes." She promised only because he was ill. She did not mean it. She meant to save him whatever it cost her, and she sat up the night plating corn out of habit, a fresh dolly in the firelight, the knot going under and over the way it had gone since she was 19, and she did not cry, because there was no use in it, and Michaelmas came up grey and gold over the frosted fields, whether she willed it or no. The green was full by 10. It was the same green. That was the cruelty of it and the making of it both. The same green where the Harvest Ball marquise had stood, the same faces that had stood in the Duke's gallery and watched her curtsy and walk out, the same county, and Silas Crane in his good black coat by the auctioneer's little table. And the auction board with Larkmore on it turned to the crowd, and Adeline at the front with old Ned and Samuel either side of her like two old dogs, and her father not there, too weak to come, which was one mercy in it. The auctioneer cleared his throat. He had his hammer. He had his book. "Ladies and gentlemen, by order the freehold of Larkmore Farm in the parish of Hold, it was not loud. It did not need to be. 4 dark horses had come onto the green, and the crowd had opened for them the way crowds open for 4 dark horses, and the Duke of Ashmere stepped down in his plain dark coat, and he walked through the whole of the vale to the auctioneer's table, and every soul on that green went quiet as a church. "Your Grace," the auctioneer stammered, the sale is by order of the note-holder, and I am the note-holder," said Tom. He said it to the county. He turned as he said it, so that they should all hear it and see him say it, and he took from his breast a folded paper, the note, £1,850, and he held it up. "There are men here," he said, "who have told this woman I'd never stand up before you and own her. Silas Crane has told her so in this market to your faces, that a duke may warm himself at a tenant's fire through a wet autumn and never wed her nor save her, and go off and marry an earl's daughter in the spring. He let that sit. I'll answer that where he said it. On this green, before every man that heard it. He looked at Adeline, only for a breath, and then he did the thing he had come to do. 11 years ago, I was a smith's son that loved a Hartwell. Some of you were young then, you'll remember. Elias Hartwell sent me off to make myself worth his daughter, and he was right to. I was worth nothing, and I went. And a year on, when I'd my first iron money and my first foothold, I wrote her a letter. I wrote and said, "Wait for me, I'm near worth your father's word now, I'm coming back for you." His voice did not shake, but the scarred hand holding the note went white at the knuckle. She never got that letter. She married a good man, believing I'd forgot her, and buried him, and near lost her home. And all these years she thought the boy just never wrote. He turned his head. But he wrote, and somebody in this vale took that letter out of the road between us, and I did not know which of us to blame the longer, the man that hid it, or myself for going quiet after and never riding back to see her face when she read my silence. You could hear the frost dripping off the market awnings. Nobody breathed. "So I'll tell you why I bought the bad notes of this vale," Tom said. "Every one of you had it half right and all wrong. I did not buy Elias Hartwell's note to own his land. God knows I've land enough. I bought it, and I paid over the odds for it, and I refused £2,200 from Silas Crane to keep it. Yes, Crane, I'll name the sum, it's in your own hand on my desk. I bought that note, and I held it for one reason on this earth." He looked at her then, and he did not look away. "I bought it so that no man in this vale, not Crane, not any of you, not the parish, nor the bank, nor time itself, could ever again put Adeline Hartwell up for auction on this green. That's all it was ever for. To make her safe. Whether she'd have me or hate me for a coronet, safe," and he took the note in his two hands, the £1,850, 4 generations of one family's fear, and he tore it clean across. And again. And he held out the halves, not to Adeline, who might have been too proud to take them, but past her to old Ned and said, "Carry those to Elias Hartwell. Tell him he dies, owing no man. Tell him it's paid, and paid for love, and there was never a farthing owed the day I took it up." The county made a sound then, altogether, that was not quite a cheer and not quite a sob. The sound a crowd makes when it has watched itself be wrong. Silas Crane went the colour of tallow. He stood by the little table with his good black coat and his ruin coming up his throat, and he tried, because his sort always tries. "This is, your grace, this is a private matter made a spectacle. A man may. £2,200, Tom said, not even loud, to buy a widow's debt and foreclose on a sick man, so that she'd have no roof and no choice but your bed. You told her marry me or read your father's name off the board. These people heard you say it not an hour past. I have your draft in your own hand, Crane, and I'll show it to any man that doubts me." He turned from him as you turn from a thing not worth the turning. "You'll find this vale a cold place to do business by spring." And that was all the justice Crane got, and it was enough. Because it was public, and it was true, and it was lawful, and a man who lives by the county's good opinion is a dead man once the county has seen him whole. Nobody struck him. Nobody had to. The farmers he'd squeezed and the widows he'd circled looked at him now with the notice fresh on the board behind him, and one by one they turned their shoulders, and Silas Crane picked up his hat off the auctioneer's table with a hand that was not quite steady, and he walked off the green alone, and the crowd closed behind him like water and did not watch him go. Prudence Vane was there. Of course she was there. She stood at the edge in her good grey furs with her father's people about her, and she had heard every word, and she was too well bred to show a thing. When Tom looked across at her, a courtesy, a debt of manners between their houses, she inclined her head to him. Cool and even, the way one equal releases another. There was the ghost of something at her mouth that might, in a warmer woman, have been a smile. "I think, your grace," she said, "clear enough to be heard, the county has quite mistaken your intentions all along. I'll set them right where I can." And she gathered her furs and her people, and withdrew with her chin level and her pride intact. yielding the field so gracefully that she came off it, in the end, the best-liked woman on the green. The rules had a face, and the face knew when a rule had met something truer than itself, and stepped aside. They carried the torn note to Elias. But Elias would not stay put. Old Ned had not got halfway before there was a stir at the back of the crowd, and there was the old man himself, 63 and grey as ash, come up the lane in the cart he'd made Samuel harness against all sense. Wrapped in a blanket, upright by will alone, they lifted him down, he would not be led. He came across the green to where the Duke of Ashmere stood, and the whole vale watched Elias Hartwell, who had forbidden this man his door, walk to him on a dying heart. "It was me," Elias said. His voice was a thread, but the green was so still it carried. "The letter. It came to Larkmore, and I took it out of the box before she rose, and I burned it in that same grate she plates her corn by, and I let her believe you'd thrown her over, because I wanted a marsh with 40 acres for her, and not a smith's boy with black hands and nothing." The tears stood in the old man's eyes and did not fall. "I've carried it 11 years. I told myself it was for the farm. It was for my pride, and my pride near cost her everything, and it cost her you, and it cost her the best years of a good heart." He put out his hand, the hand that had once pointed a poor boy off his land, and it shook. "I did you a black wrong, Tom Rourke. Duke or Smith, I did you wrong, and I did my girl worse, and I'll not go to my grave without I say it where I said the other thing. Before the parish. I'm sorry. Will you take an old fool's hand?" And Tom Rourke, Duke of Ashmere, who had gone away at 20 with that man's contempt on his back, took the old man's shaking hand in both his scarred ones, gentle as you'd take a bird, and said, "There's nothing to forgive that's not forgiven, Miss Hartwell. You gave me the reason I made myself worth anything at all. It was always going to be her. You only made it take the long way round." And he held the old man up when his knees went, and old Ned got the other side of him, and Elias wept on the green among his neighbours, and was not ashamed, and something 4 generations old and hard finally broke and let the light in. Then Tom turned to Adeline. He had not touched her. Through all of it, he had not once touched her, nor asked her a thing, because a man does not buy a woman's yes with a grand gesture in front of a crowd, and he knew it, and he had left her free to the last. He came to her now with the noise of the county falling away, and he reached not into the pocket where a coronet's worth of anything might have lived, but into his coat, over his heart, and he brought out a small brown thing that had ridden there since the night of the ball. The corn dolly. Her corn dolly, the one that fell on his gallery floor, the harvest knot he taught her at 19, kept warm against him a whole autumn. "I've carried this since you dropped it and walked out of my house," he said, low, for her now, and not the crowd. "And there's another in my desk I found at the stile, the summer I came home, before I ever knew if you'd speak to me. I've had 2 of your harvest knots, and not the right to either." He held it out on his open scarred palm. "I'm not offering you a coronet, Addie. You never wanted one, and I know it. I'm offering you what the smith's boy offered you at the stile and couldn't make good on. Me. Just the man. Late. God knows I'm late, but come back the whole way like I swore I would. Will you have me?" And Adeline Hartwell looked at the corn dolly in the Duke's hand, and 11 years, and a burned letter, and a good dead man given his peace, and a farm that was hers and free, and the boy inside the man looking at her the way he'd looked across a gate at 19. And she did not curtsy this time, and she did not walk out. "Yes," she said, just the one word. It was all it ever needed to be. The following harvest, the fields at Larkmore came up gold and clean and paid free, and the mended fence rail held, and the lower field that had been sour 2 winters gave the best barley in the vale. Elias Hartwell lived to see it, against the doctor's word, sitting in his chair on the porch in the honey light of an autumn afternoon with a rug on his knees, and if his heart was a poor weak thing it beat easy now, for a man dies harder when he owes nothing and has been forgiven. Adeline was a duchess, The county called her Your Grace, and mostly meant it, and she wore it lightly, the way she wore everything, and the 200 rooms of Ashmere never once cowed her. But that first autumn, as his wife, she went down into the great cold kitchen of Ashmere, past the staring cook and the staring maids, and she rolled her own sleeves, and she made the first meal in that house cooked by the mistress's 2 hands, plain bread and a fowl, and the apples off Larkmore's own trees. And she set it before him herself, and Tom Rourke ate a duchess's cooking at his own table, and looked at her over the candles like a man who had waited 11 years for exactly this, and could not credit that it had come. Silas Crane's mill was sold that spring to cover his debts, for the Vale would not deal with him after the Green, and he went off to Wexbridge and then further, and nobody was quite sure where. And the Vale did not mourn. Above the great hearth at Ashmere, where a lesser house would have hung a sword or a stag's head, or the arms of some borrowed ancestor, there hung a small brown corn dolly, a harvest knot plaited by a farm girl of 19, and any grand guest who asked about it was told by the Duke, plainly and with no shame at all, that it was the most valuable thing in the house. She had believed, once, that love had had its single chance and let it fall. She had been wrong. It had only taken the long way round, through pride and silence and a burned letter and a bad marriage kept honestly, and 11 hard years, and come back at last up the muddy lane in its own boots to mend the fence before it ever said a word. It is never too late for the heart. Adeline Hartwell learned it at 34 on a village green, with a torn note fluttering and an old wrong made right and a corn dolly warm in a duke's hand. If her story found you tonight, tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Adeline's story travels.